Ruthless billionaire married an innocent girl for revenge, only to discover she wasn't the enemy. The sound of ticking echoed in the vast, silent office of Zane Kingston. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. But Zane wasn't looking at it. He stood in the shadows, fingers clenched around a glass of untouched scotch, eyes locked on a photo. A newspaper clipping, yellowed with time, showed a smiling man, Thomas Kingston, Zane's father. Next to it, a court document, fraud, bankruptcy, suicide, and next to that, a name that had haunted him for years, Morrison Industries. "Everything changed the day your father met Charles Morrison," Zane's mother had once said, her voice trembling as she held Zane's hand. "That deal destroyed us. They made him the scapegoat, and your father, he couldn't take it." Zane had never forgotten, nor forgiven, and now Morrison Industries was collapsing. Their only heir, a girl, sweet, quiet, unaware of the blood her last name carried, Ariel Morrison. He opened a folder on his desk, her life laid out in cold facts. 22, no business experience, lives with her uncle, designs children's books, sweet, sheltered, and stupid enough to fall into my trap. He picked up a sleek phone and made the call. "Mr. Conrad," he said coolly, speaking to Ariel's uncle, "tell her my company is willing to save Morrison Industries, but there's one condition: she marries me." Across the city, in a modest brownstone apartment, Ariel Morrison carefully folded a hand-painted scarf into a box. She worked late into the night, humming softly, unaware that her world was about to change. "Uncle," she asked over dinner, "why are you suddenly smiling so much?" Her uncle, Conrad Morrison, wiped his mouth and gave a chuckle. "Because, sweetheart, fate's finally smiling on us." The next day, Ariel was summoned to a luxury suite at a 5-star hotel. She entered nervously, wearing a simple floral dress, her fingers fidgeting. A man in a tailored black suit stood near the window, broad shoulders, dark hair, not turning around. His presence was thunder in silence. "You're Ariel Morrison," he said, without looking at her. "Yes, and you must be Mr. Kingston?" she asked gently. He finally turned. Zane Kingston's eyes were dark, unreadable, not cruel, but emotionless. "You'll marry me," he said, not a question, an order. "In 3 days." Ariel blinked. I beg your pardon?" He walked forward, slow and deliberate. "Morrison Industries is in ruins. Your family owes the government millions. Your uncle has signed the preliminary agreements. The only way to finalize the deal is if we marry. It's business, Miss Morrison, nothing more." She took a step back. "But we don't even know each other." "You don't need to know me. You just need to obey." His words stung like ice water. Ariel's breath caught. "Why me?" she whispered. Zane's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Why her? Because she wore the name Morrison like perfume, and he was going to make her choke on it. 3 days later, Ariel stood alone at the altar, inside a private Kingston estate, surrounded by opulence she'd only seen in magazines. No guests, no music, no vows. Just Zane Kingston, standing like a god of war in a black suit, expression blank. The officiant barely whispered the words. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Zane didn't look at her, didn't take her hand, just signed a document and walked out of the room like it was a boardroom meeting. Ariel stood there in her ivory dress, clutching her bouquet as the door slammed shut. Her heart whispered, "What have I done?" Outside, Zane got into his waiting black car, fingers clenching the steering wheel. "She's in," he murmured, "and now the game begins." The first morning of marriage, but not the kind with breakfast in bed, kisses, or shared laughter. Ariel stood alone in her new bedroom, a luxurious, ice-cold chamber the size of her entire apartment. The cream walls were spotless, the chandelier glittered, but the silence was unbearable. No husband, no note, no warmth, only a maid who whispered, "Mr. Kingston said you may use this room. He won't be staying here." Ariel blinked, stunned. "He won't?" The maid gave a practiced smile, bowed, and left. Downstairs, Zane Kingston sat in his home office, watching the surveillance feed from Ariel's room on a sleek monitor. Not to invade her privacy, but to remind himself that this was a transaction. Nothing more. He saw her standing near the window, hugging herself. "She's in the lion's den now," he murmured. That evening, Zane finally appeared in the hallway outside her bedroom. Dressed in a crisp, dark shirt, cufflinks gleaming, he looked more like a CEO heading to war than a newlywed. Ariel opened the door slowly. "I thought, maybe we could talk," she asked softly. Zane didn't meet her eyes. "There's nothing to talk about." She frowned. "We're married." "In name only." She bit her lip. "I don't understand. Why would you marry someone you clearly don't want around?" He stepped closer, his eyes colder than steel. "Because I needed a Morrison, and you were the only one left." Her face paled. His words landed like a slap, but he didn't stop. "From now on, you'll live here. You'll attend public events with me when required. But don't mistake this for a real marriage. This house is yours to roam, but my life is off limits." "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, tears welling. He stared at her for a long moment, and then, in a tone like ice, he said, "Because fairy tales don't exist, especially not for people like you." Later that night, Ariel sat in bed, staring at the diamond ring on her finger. It glittered under the dim bedside lamp, heavy and unfamiliar. She reached for her sketchbook, her only comfort, and drew, but her hands trembled. Elsewhere in the house, Zane stood at his late father's old piano, untouched for years. He pressed a single key. A flat note echoed into the dark room. "She looks like she doesn't even know what her family did to mine," he muttered. "But that innocence can't be real." He poured himself a drink, the glass clinking like judgment in his hand. The next morning, tabloids exploded with headlines. "Kingston's surprise bride. Who is she? Gold digger or Cinderella?" Zane's silent wedding shock society. Ariel's photo was splashed across every social feed, her name dragged through elite gossip forums. She didn't even own a smartphone to defend herself. She turned on the TV and watched anchors speculate about her past. When Zane walked past the living room, she called out, "Are you going to say anything?" He stopped. "About what?" "That I'm not a gold digger." He gave a slight shrug. "Let them talk. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," she said quietly. "My name matters to me." Zane's jaw tightened. "Too bad yours was bought years ago." And he walked away. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow. Zane stood outside her door, listening. Eyes closed. He didn't enter. He never would. The sun rose on Kingston Manor, but the chill inside lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. Ariel stepped into the grand dining hall, dressed modestly in a pale blue blouse and soft cream skirt. The table stretched endlessly, adorned with untouched silverware and a full breakfast spread, fruit, croissants, eggs, and coffee, for two. But only one seat was filled. Zane Kingston, perfectly polished in his custom black suit, sipped his coffee like the room was empty. Ariel cleared her throat gently. "Good morning." He didn't respond, not a glance, not a word. She walked slowly to the seat across from him and sat. "I made a pot of chamomile tea. It helps with stress." Still nothing. She poured herself a cup, hiding the sting behind her calm. After a few silent bites, she whispered, "Do you always ignore people at breakfast?" Zane finally looked up. His voice was sharp. Only the ones who don't matter. The cup in Ariel's hand trembled, and she set it down carefully. I don't know what I did to deserve this treatment, but I'm not your enemy, Zane. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence screamed louder than words. Later that day, Zane returned home early. Unusual for him. He stopped near the library and heard faint humming. Curious, he pushed the door open. There was Ariel, kneeling on the floor, with books scattered around her. Her hair was tied into a messy bun, a streak of graphite on her cheek as she sketched in a small journal. He watched from the shadows. She was drawing his mother, a perfect likeness from the portrait hanging in the main hall. Zane's throat tightened. Ariel turned, startled. Oh, I didn't hear you come in. I like to draw when I feel anxious. He stared at her for a long moment. Where did you see her? She blinked. There's a picture of her in the hallway. She looked kind. Zane walked over slowly. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. My mother died thinking our name meant shame. Ariel swallowed. I'm sorry. He took the sketch from her hand and stared at it. You captured her softness, he muttered. Then, as if catching himself, his voice snapped cold again. Don't draw her again. Before she could respond, he was gone. That evening, as Ariel helped the housekeeper carry tea, a pot slipped from her hand and boiling water splashed across her skin. She screamed. Zane came running, faster than anyone expected. He dropped to his knees beside her, grabbing a towel and pressing it gently to her arm. Get the doctor, now! He barked to the staff. Ariel blinked up at him, breath trembling. You came. Zane looked down at her burned hand in his. His voice cracked for the first time. You were hurt. Their eyes met, his hand still wrapped around hers. He caught himself, stood up, and backed away, like the moment had never happened. You should be more careful. And then he walked off, jaw tight, leaving her stunned. That night, Zane opened his private study drawer and pulled out a notebook, Ariel's diary. He hadn't meant to find it. She had left it in the hallway days ago, forgotten. He opened it slowly and read a single line. I don't think he knows how broken he is, or how deeply I wish I could fix him. Zane closed the diary and stared into the darkness. The next morning, Ariel came downstairs and found the media outside going wild. Tabloids were everywhere. Zane's ghost wife. Why won't he claim her? Photos. She lives there, but are they even married? Zane stood at the window, sipping his espresso as if nothing happened. She turned to him, voice calm but shaking. Can you please make a statement? Just say something kind. Anything, please. He didn't turn around. Public opinion doesn't affect me. But it affects me, she snapped, louder than she meant to. He turned slowly, face unreadable. I told you before, Ariel, this is not a real marriage. And then he walked past her like she was invisible. That night, Ariel sat in bed, staring out the window, whispering into the quiet. I don't know who I married, but I think his heart died a long time ago. What she didn't know, just outside her door, Zane stood listening, and something deep inside him cracked, just a little. The thunder rolled in the distance, low and ominous, as grey clouds smothered the Manhattan skyline. Inside the Kingston mansion, the windows rattled faintly, casting fleeting shadows across the marble floors. Ariel stood by the parlor window, arms folded tightly over her chest. She didn't flinch at the sound of thunder, but her eyes flicked toward the horizon. Her mother used to say that storms were heaven's way of washing away pain, but here, in this cold mansion, pain didn't wash away. It sank deeper. She glanced at the clock, almost evening. Zane hadn't come home yet. Again. The silence of the mansion felt heavier during storms. Even the staff moved quietly, as though careful not to disturb the ghosts haunting the walls. Ariel wandered through the west wing, one she'd never dared enter before. Her fingers trailed along the mahogany trim as she explored a gallery of framed memories. Most were of Zane's mother, an elegant woman with deep eyes and a kind smile. She paused in front of one oil painting, hand-painted with intricate detail. Lady Helena Kingston. Ariel took a step closer. The softness in the woman's face was hauntingly familiar. Then she noticed it, on the bottom right corner of the frame, scratched faintly into the wood, like a secret. To Helena, always my compass. Zane's father's handwriting, maybe. She touched the engraving gently. Your son is lost, she whispered, but he's not beyond saving. Later that evening, the storm broke. Rain pounded against the glass like impatient fists. Lightning streaked the sky, illuminating the hallway as Ariel carried a tray of hot soup down the corridor. The lights flickered once, then again, then went black. A scream escaped her lips. The tray clattered to the floor, ceramic shattering across the carpet. Not again, she whispered, heart thundering louder than the storm. She dropped to her knees, trembling. The darkness wasn't just physical. It crawled into her mind, pulling her back to memories she buried long ago. She hated the dark. Ever since that night. The night her mother tried to leave them and didn't make it back. She pressed her hands over her ears, shaking. Footsteps pounded toward her. Ariel! Zane's voice. A second later, his hand found her shoulder. What happened? He asked sharply. The lights, she gasped. I can't. Without thinking, Zane bent down, wrapping his arm around her. I've got you. It's just a blackout. The generators will kick in soon. She curled toward him instinctively, her body betraying her pain. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm like this. I know it's irrational. Zane didn't say anything for a moment. His hand gently stroked her back. It's not irrational, he said quietly. We all have scars. Ariel blinked, surprised at the softness in his voice. Another flash of lightning lit up the hallway, and in that brief moment, she saw his face. Not cold, not cruel, just human. You're shaking, he murmured. I hate the dark, she whispered. Ever since I was 10. My mother left during a storm and never came home. Zane looked down at her, stunned. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't manipulating him. Her pain was real. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Come on, he said, helping her to her feet. Let's go where the emergency lights are. He guided her to his private study, the only room with backup power. A warm golden lamp lit the corner, casting a soft glow over the space. It smelled of cedarwood and old leather. Ariel sat on the couch, shivering despite the coat. Zane poured 2 glasses of brandy and handed her one. It'll help, he said simply. She hesitated, then sipped. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window pane. I thought you didn't want me in this part of the house, she finally said. Zane gave a quiet huff. I didn't want you anywhere near me, period. That much was clear, she muttered under her breath. His lip twitched, almost a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He stood across from her, drink in hand. His voice was softer now. You really don't know what your family did, do you? She met his gaze, confused. I know my father made bad deals. But I was a child, Zane. I wasn't part of any of it. Zane stared into his glass. Your father made more than bad deals. He ruined mine. She waited, quietly. Zane sat across from her, elbows on his knees, eyes far away. My father trusted him. Charles Morrison offered him a partnership in a tech venture. They signed everything, invested everything. But when the project failed, Morrison pinned it all on my father. He took the credit, my father took the fall, then came the lawsuits, the bankruptcy, the public disgrace. His voice caught. He took his life 2 weeks later. Ariel's heart dropped. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I never knew." "You weren't supposed to," he said bitterly. "You lived protected, while my family was shredded apart." She swallowed hard. "If I could change the past, I would. But I swear on everything I am, I didn't know." Silence stretched between them like a fragile thread. Then Zane stood up and walked to his desk. He pulled something from a drawer and handed it to her. It was her sketch of his mother. "I said never to draw her again," he said. "But I was wrong." Ariel stared at the drawing, her throat tightening. "She looks peaceful," he added. "I haven't seen her that way in years." Ariel looked up, startled. "You kept it?" Zane looked away. "I don't keep things unless they matter." And before she could reply, the lights flickered back to life. But somehow, the darkness had already left the room. The next morning, Zane was gone before she woke, but a small plate sat on the breakfast table. One slice of lemon cake, her favorite. No note, no words, just the first glimpse that the ice prince might be thawing. The days that followed the storm were filled with strange silence, but not the heavy kind that used to cling to the mansion walls like a curse. This silence was different. It was watchful, curious, almost waiting. Ariel sat in the sunroom, sketching the garden from memory. She hadn't seen Zane since the night of the blackout, when he held her, listened to her, and, for the briefest moment, treated her like she mattered. She touched her arm where his hand had rested, and felt warmth, lingering and unwanted. She should hate him. She wanted to hate him. But it was becoming harder to hold on to hate when he started leaving behind crumbs of kindness, like the lemon cake, or the way the housekeeper quietly mentioned that Ariel's favorite books were suddenly in the library, or how the lights in her wing now stayed on during storms. He hadn't spoken much since that night, but he was seeing her, and that was more dangerous than cruelty. Zane stood on the balcony outside his study, staring at the city skyline, jaw clenched as the wind tugged at his sleeves. He hadn't meant to care. This marriage was supposed to be a trap, a punishment, a statement. But Ariel, she wasn't like them. She wasn't like her father, her uncle, or the socialites that flitted through his world, like moths around money. She was soft-spoken but firm, gentle but not weak. She challenged him just by existing, by not breaking under his bitterness. He saw her yesterday, helping a maid carry flowers into the hallway. The maid had dropped a vase, water everywhere. Ariel had knelt without a word, laughing softly as she helped clean up. He didn't remember the last time someone laughed in his house. It unnerved him, because for the first time in years, Zane Kingston was starting to feel again, and feelings made men weak. That afternoon, the Kingston Foundation hosted its annual Hearts for Hope Gala, a massive charity event that Zane usually attended alone. But this time, he needed Ariel by his side, publicly at least. He knocked on her door without warning. Ariel opened it slowly. Her hair was curled softly, and she wore a pale lavender dress with off-the-shoulder sleeves that shimmered faintly under the light. Zane blinked. He hadn't expected her to look ethereal. "Are you ready?" he asked, straightening his cufflinks to avoid staring. She nodded, hesitant. "Yes, I think so." He held out his arm. Ariel paused, then gently rested her hand on his. It was the first time they'd touched in public. The gala was held in a luxurious ballroom on Fifth Avenue, with chandeliers glittering above and cameras flashing everywhere. The elite of New York were out in force. Actors, CEOs, socialites, everyone curious to finally see the ghost bride. Zane walked beside her, stoic and unreadable. Ariel smiled politely, staying close to his side. As they entered, a reporter pushed forward. "Mr. Kingston, Mrs. Kingston, can we get a few words?" Zane's jaw tensed, but Ariel stepped in. "It's an honor to support the Hearts for Hope campaign," she said gracefully. "We believe every child deserves a fighting chance." The reporter blinked, surprised at her poise. Zane was even more surprised. They moved past the cameras, entering the crowd of donors and clients. Ariel whispered under her breath, "You're welcome." Zane tilted his head toward her, murmuring, "Where did you learn to handle vultures?" She gave him a small smile. "I used to volunteer at a children's hospital. Trust me, kids with questions are harder to handle than the press." For a moment, he almost smiled. During the event, Ariel disappeared for a moment to freshen up. When Zane turned around to find her, he saw her crouched beside a little girl in a wheelchair near the refreshment table. The child looked frightened by the crowd. Ariel knelt with her, holding her hand, whispering something that made the girl laugh. Zane stood frozen. A donor beside him chuckled, nudging him with a glass of champagne. "Your wife's got a golden heart, Kingston. She's more of a brand asset than you realize." Zane didn't reply. He couldn't. He was too busy staring at the woman he married for revenge, comforting a scared little girl like she'd known her for years. On the way home, the silence in the car felt warmer than ever before. "You didn't have to go above and beyond tonight," Zane finally said. "But you did." Ariel looked out the window. "Maybe I wanted to prove I'm not the gold digger they say I am." "You already proved that," he said quietly. She turned to him, surprised. He added, "You don't care about money. You never did." Her voice softened. "You're finally starting to see that?" Zane stared ahead, lips pressed into a firm line. "Yes," he admitted, "and I don't know what to do with that." 2 days later, while walking through a market near the estate, Ariel got distracted, admiring a watercolor painting sold by a street artist. She hadn't noticed the slick pavement. Her foot caught. She fell, hard, onto the cobblestone, scraping her palms and twisting her ankle. She cried out, and the crowd swirled around her. A few people recognized her. "Isn't that Kingston's wife? Look at her, always pretending to be delicate." Before Ariel could even sit up, a black SUV screeched to a stop at the curb. Zane jumped out, eyes wild with panic. He pushed through the crowd and dropped to her side. "Ariel, what happened?" She tried to smile. "I tripped. It's nothing, really." "Don't move," he barked, then softened. "Please." He scooped her into his arms, ignoring the flashes of paparazzi nearby. Ariel's heart thudded painfully in her chest. He held her like she was breakable, like she was his. Back at the mansion, Zane gently placed her on the couch and knelt beside her. The housekeeper arrived with a first aid kit, but Zane waved her off. "I've got it." He cleaned her scraped palms with surprising gentleness. She hissed in pain, and he paused, his brows furrowed. "You never think about yourself," he murmured. "You let the world stomp on you." "I can handle it," she said softly. Zane looked up. "But you shouldn't have to." Their eyes locked. Something thick and invisible passed between them. Then she did it. She said his name. "Zane." Not Mr. Kingston, not Sir, just Zane. His breath caught. She reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "You don't have to be alone anymore." And for the first time, he didn't pull away. Later that night, Zane stood outside her room, staring at the door. He didn't knock, he didn't speak, but in his hand, he held her sketch of the little girl from the gala, a new one she had left on the kitchen counter. He folded it gently, slid it into his jacket pocket, and whispered into the quiet hallway. "Why can't I hate you? The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the marble floors of Kingston Manor, slanting through tall windows in brilliant shafts. Yet inside Zane's private office, the light barely reached. Dust motes danced lazily in the still air, hovering over bookshelves that hadn't been touched in years. Ariel stepped inside quietly, her footsteps muffled on the thick rug. She wasn't sure what had drawn her in, curiosity or instinct. Zane was away on a business trip in Boston, and the mansion, while grand, felt suffocating without even the occasional sound of his footsteps or his dry, clipped voice. It was the first time she'd felt his absence, too deeply. She ran her hand along the side of the walnut bookshelf, trailing her fingers across the worn leather bindings. One book caught her attention, not because of the title, but because it had no title at all, just a smooth, cracked brown spine with no markings. Curious, she tugged it free. A thin layer of dust lifted into the air, and when she opened it, her heart stopped. It wasn't a book, it was a photo album. The first page held a black and white portrait of a younger Zane, maybe 8 years old, sitting beside a handsome man, his father. They shared the same jawline, the same piercing gaze. Beside them sat a beautiful woman with wavy dark hair and soft, sad eyes. Zane's mother. Ariel smiled faintly. She could feel the love pouring from the image. This wasn't the Zane she knew, the ice prince who barked orders and built emotional walls. This was a boy surrounded by family, by warmth. But as she turned the page, her blood chilled, because there, in the corner of the next photo, was her father, Charles Morrison, smiling politely, standing beside Zane's father and shaking hands. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Her father and Zane's father, together. She flipped through more pages, her fingers trembling now. There were documents tucked inside, newspaper clippings, business articles, even a photocopy of a contract. Kingston Morrison Technology Ventures dated 12 years ago. She remembered nothing of this. She'd been barely 10 years old when her father was involved in business. He kept his corporate life far away from her childhood. Then she saw it, an old envelope, weathered and sealed. It was addressed to Helena Kingston. Inside was a letter. Ariel hesitated. Was she invading privacy now? Was this going too far? Her fingers shook as she unfolded the note. Dearest Helena, I swear to you, I had no idea what Charles was planning. He forged signatures. He leaked false information to the board. He cut your husband out before the ink was dry. I'm sorry. I tried to stop him. I couldn't. I think he's going to ruin everything and walk away clean. Daniel Conrad, her uncle. Ariel stared at the signature, eyes wide with horror. My uncle knew? The room spun slightly. She felt the album slip from her lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the mansion. Zane was home. Ariel's heart leapt into her throat. She gathered the photo album, clutching it against her chest as she rushed from the study, her thoughts racing. She had to tell him. He deserved to know. But when she turned the corner into the main hallway, Zane was already there, coat in hand, phone to his ear, jaw tight with stress. He spotted her immediately. Ariel? His brows furrowed. What are you doing in that part of the house? She hesitated. I found something. You need to see it. He stepped forward, his tone immediately suspicious. What did you find? Without a word, she held out the photo album. Zane took it from her, flipping through the pages quickly, his face growing paler with every turn. Then he saw it, the letter. He froze. Where did you find this? His voice was cold, dangerously quiet. In the bookshelf in your office, Ariel said. I didn't mean to snoop. You went through my private files? He cut in, his eyes narrowing. Her chest tightened. Zane, your mother was being warned, By my uncle. I had no idea about any of this, I swear, but he didn't answer. His fingers clenched the letter as if trying to crush it. Don't you see? She urged. Your father wasn't betrayed by my father alone. It was a setup. My uncle manipulated them both. Zane looked up, and something in his eyes scared her. The coldness she'd chipped away at had returned, with reinforcements. This changes nothing, he said flatly. Ariel's lips parted. What do you mean? It changes everything. No, Zane growled, stepping back. This doesn't absolve you. You're still a Morrison, and you still married me under a name that ruined my family. But you forced me into that marriage, she cried, her voice cracking. You wanted revenge, Zane. You used me. And now you want pity? His words were sharper than a blade. Ariel flinched like he'd slapped her. No, she whispered. I don't want pity. I want truth. She turned and ran, tears burning her eyes, throat aching. That night, Zane sat alone in his study, the letter lying open on the desk in front of him. He'd read it 5 times, 10. He'd memorized the curves of every word. His glass of scotch remained untouched. Across the room, the photo album sat on the shelf again, closed, quiet, waiting. Ariel's voice echoed in his mind. You used me. She was right, but she didn't know the whole story. She didn't know he'd once stood over his father's casket and promised, I'll destroy everyone who had a hand in this. He never expected to fall for one of them. He never expected her. In her bedroom, Ariel lay curled on her side, tears soaking the pillow. He didn't believe her, he wouldn't even try. She had offered him truth, and he threw it back in her face. But worse, her own uncle had been part of it all. Who had her father really been? Was her entire childhood a lie? She stared at the ceiling, voice hoarse with grief. I don't know who I am anymore. The walls of Kingston Manor had never heard shouting before, at least not from Ariel. But tonight, they did, because she had finally reached her limit. She paced the drawing room, fire burning in her chest. Her fists were clenched, cheeks flushed, and tears sat unshed in the corners of her eyes. For once, she didn't care how expensive the walls were, or how intimidating the chandeliers looked, or how many secrets this mansion was built to bury. She was done being the quiet one, the obedient one, the disposable one. And when Zane walked in, coat over his arm, loosened tie around his neck, he didn't get the usual soft-spoken welcome. He got a storm. You used me, Ariel snapped, her voice trembling. Zane blinked, caught off guard. He shut the door slowly. Not this again. Don't you dare dismiss me, she hissed. You married me out of revenge. You watched me walk down that aisle, knowing I was nothing but a piece in your sick plan. He didn't deny it. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. You looked into my eyes on our wedding day and said nothing. You let me believe it was just business, but it was never about business. It was punishment. Zane exhaled, voice taut. And you didn't question any of it. You signed the papers, Ariel. You wanted out of your uncle's debt. Don't play the saint. Her breath hitched. You think I wanted this? I would have scrubbed toilets for 10 years if I knew this is what you'd do to me. I thought maybe you were cold, distant, but I never thought you were cruel. Zane turned away, hands shoved into his pockets. I did what I had to do. No, she said firmly. You did what made you feel powerful. Her words hit him like a slap, though he didn't flinch. A beat of silence passed. Then she whispered the thing that had been eating her alive for days. I trusted you. Zane stiffened. Ariel's voice cracked. Not at first, but somewhere along the way, I started believing there was more to you. That the man who helped me during the blackout, who comforted me when I fell, who left me lemon cake on the table, that man was real. Zane turned slowly, eyes dark, You want the truth? He asked, voice low. The man you saw was a mistake, a weakness. I've spent 10 years building walls you tried to tear down with your pretty sketches and soft words. She stepped back like he'd shoved her. So that's it? Everything between us meant nothing to you? His eyes flickered, just for a second, but then came the mask. Cold, ruthless. I married you to break you, he said quietly. Don't forget that. Ariel's mouth parted. The pain spread through her chest like fire. Then break me, she said bitterly. Go ahead, finish what you started. She shoved the photo album toward him, the letter from her uncle falling to the floor. But Zane didn't move. Ariel's voice dropped to a whisper. You can't do it, can you? Because you don't hate me anymore. He took a step forward. Don't push me. Why? Because you might finally feel something? She snapped. That terrifies you, doesn't it? That under all that steel and silence, you might be capable of loving someone? Don't say that, Zane said through clenched teeth. Why not? Her voice shook. Because you already do? And then it happened. He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, without warning, without words. His hand cupped her face roughly, and his mouth crashed into hers. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't romantic. It was desperate, wild, chaotic. It was years of buried emotion ripping loose all at once. Ariel gasped into the kiss, her hands pressed against his chest, but not pushing, just feeling. His heartbeat was rapid, his breath ragged. Zane's grip loosened slightly, and the kiss slowed, turned tender. She felt his hesitation, the war inside him. She felt the apology he couldn't say, and the longing he didn't want to admit. But just when she leaned into it, just when her body began to melt into his, he pulled away, abruptly. His chest rose and fell, as if he'd just run a marathon. They stared at each other, lips parted, eyes wide. Zane stepped back like he'd touched fire. That was a mistake. Ariel swallowed hard. You keep saying that, but you keep making them. His jaw tightened. This doesn't change anything. You're right, she said softly. Because tomorrow morning, I'm leaving. His head snapped up. What? I'm leaving this house, Zane, this marriage, this war you dragged me into. He stepped forward, alarm flashing in his eyes. You can't just leave. Watch me. And for the first time since they met, Zane Kingston looked genuinely scared. Later that night, Ariel sat on the edge of her bed, suitcase open beside her. She packed slowly, purposefully, not because she wanted to leave, but because she had to, because staying meant losing herself. She picked up her sketchbook and flipped to the page where she'd drawn Zane's eyes. She stared at it for a long moment, then tore the page out and folded it. She left it on the nightstand with a note. In another life, maybe we could have been more. Meanwhile, Zane sat in his dark study, staring into the fireplace. His lips still burned, his hands still trembled. He replayed the kiss over and over, how she tasted, how she looked at him afterward, and worst of all, how she said she was leaving. He'd spent a decade planning his revenge. He'd waited for the perfect moment to strike, and he had everything now, her name, her trust, her vulnerability. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like devastation, because for the first time in his carefully controlled, ruthlessly executed life, Zane Kingston was about to lose something he wanted. No, someone. The soft rustling of fabric was the only sound in Ariel's room as she folded her last blouse into the suitcase. Her fingers lingered on the hem of the shirt. Her favorite, a simple pale green with lace at the collar. She had worn it on their third day of marriage, thinking Zane might notice. He hadn't, but now he had noticed her in every possible way, just too late, and for all the wrong reasons. The kiss still burned on her lips, not just because of its intensity, but because of what it revealed. The truth Zane had been hiding behind cold eyes and clipped words. He did feel something, but instead of facing it, he called it a mistake. Well, she wasn't going to make the same mistake by staying. Ariel wheeled her suitcase quietly into the grand hallway. The mansion was silent, but not asleep. Zane's world was always watching. The staff knew better than to interfere, but she could feel the curiosity in every averted gaze. "Mrs. Kingston," the butler said gently. "Do you need a car?" She gave him a small smile. "I'll find my own way." He looked like he wanted to say something more, but nodded. "Safe travels." Ariel left through the front entrance, head high, spine straight. If Zane wanted to tear her down, she'd make sure he saw her walk away standing tall. She didn't go to her uncle's house. That door was closed forever. Instead, she booked a room at a modest boutique hotel tucked away near Central Park. It wasn't lavish, but it was warm and peaceful. The room overlooked the trees, their summer leaves trembling in the breeze. For the first time in weeks, she breathed without tension. Still, peace didn't mean closure. There were questions she still needed answered, especially after finding that letter in Zane's photo album. Her uncle, Daniel Conrad, had known about the forged documents. He'd known her father was being manipulated, and he did nothing. She had to know more. The next morning, Ariel took a cab to a quiet retirement villa on the outskirts of the city. Her old childhood nanny, Mrs. Gardner, lived there now. Retired, gentle, but with a memory sharp as glass. The woman opened the door with a warm smile and a blanket draped over her shoulders. "Ariel Morrison," she said, pulling her into a hug. "Good heavens, child, you look exhausted." Ariel smiled faintly. "It's been a complicated year." They sat in the small sunroom, drinking tea and nibbling on lemon biscuits. It felt almost surreal, soothing and heartbreaking at once. "I need to ask you something," Ariel said finally. "It's about my father." Mrs. Gardner nodded. "I figured. Sit then. Speak what's on your heart." Ariel hesitated, then leaned forward. "Did you know anything about his partnership with the Kingstons? About the downfall of their company?" Mrs. Gardner's eyes clouded. "I know your father was not the monster they made him out to be." "You do?" Ariel breathed. The older woman took a sip of tea. "Your father was intelligent but too trusting. He brought in investors without vetting them properly. One of them, your uncle, used that to his advantage." Ariel felt her stomach twist. "Charles signed things Daniel gave him," Mrs. Gardner continued. "He didn't read everything, because Daniel insisted it was all routine, but it wasn't. Some of those signatures authorized fund transfers. Others passed liability to Kingston Technologies." "So Zane's father took the fall," Ariel whispered. "Yes," she nodded solemnly, "and your father blamed himself when he found out too late. But Daniel, that man never looked back, walked away richer than both families combined." Tears welled in Ariel's eyes. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" Mrs. Gardner's voice was firm. "Because by the time someone tried, it was already done. Your father was ruined, emotionally. He kept everything from you, wanted to protect you." Ariel clutched her teacup, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Zane thinks I was part of it," she said, "that I was born into deceit." Mrs. Gardner reached across and squeezed her hand. "You were born into love. It's not your fault if others betrayed that." Later that afternoon, Ariel walked through the gardens of the retirement home, her thoughts heavy but clearer than before. She now had truth, but truth without understanding was useless. Zane needed to know what she had learned, but not for revenge, for closure, for peace, and maybe for the chance to rebuild something from the ashes. But she wasn't going to beg for it. Not again. Meanwhile, back at Kingston Manor, Zane sat in his home office, staring blankly at the fireplace. The room was dim, untouched, like a reflection of his mood. She was gone, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel victorious after driving someone away. He felt hollow. He held her note in his hand, reading it for the 100th time. In another life, maybe we could have been more. His jaw tightened. The words hit harder than any boardroom battle. He had kissed her like she was his lifeline, then pushed her away like she was poison. He couldn't even blame her for leaving. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his assistant. Daniel Conrad was seen entering a private law firm this morning. Rumor says he's liquidating property connected to Morrison Industries. Might be worth looking into. Zane's eyes narrowed. That name again. It had started with Conrad, and now, maybe it would end with him too. That evening, Ariel returned to the hotel and opened her sketchbook. Her fingers flew across the page, not drawing Zane this time, but her father. From memory, then her uncle, side by side. The contrast in their expressions was stunning. One warm, protective, the other cold and smug. She flipped the page and began to sketch another image, Zane, but not the cold, unreachable Zane. The man she had seen glimpses of, kneeling to wrap her burned hand, defending her from paparazzi, tucking her under his coat during the storm. She didn't know what that Zane wanted anymore, but she knew what she wanted. Not pity, not apologies, truth, accountability, and maybe, the love they both kept running from. The Manhattan skyline shimmered in the morning sun, but inside a high-rise conference center, just blocks from Wall Street, all eyes were on Ariel Morrison Kingston. Not for being Zane Kingston's wife, not for her infamous arranged marriage, or the cruel headlines that once painted her a gold digger. No, today the whispers in the room weren't scandal, they were admiration. Isn't that Zane Kingston's wife? She started that new art scholarship fund for low-income girls. She declined an interview with Forbes last week, said she wanted the work to speak for itself. Ariel stood at the podium, poised and radiant in a white silk blouse and tailored navy skirt. Her natural curls framed her face, glowing under the spotlight. "We don't just need talent in our future generations," she said, her voice strong, clear. "We need access, opportunity, dignity, and for every young girl who's been told she's not enough, I want this program to be her answer." Applause thundered through the room. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled. Somewhere in the back row, unseen, stood Zane Kingston, watching, speechless. He hadn't meant to be there. In fact, he hadn't planned on seeing her at all. Not since she walked out of the mansion 5 days ago, leaving nothing behind but a note and a sketch. But then he read the press release about her scholarship project, the Aurora Initiative, named after the dawn she never stopped chasing. She didn't just disappear, she rose, and she did it without him. Zane clenched his jaw as Ariel descended the stage, smiling politely at donors. She moved with quiet grace, surrounded by admiration, and she didn't once look around for him. He'd been so used to her being still, waiting, software. But now, she was fire in heels, and he had never wanted her more. An hour later, Ariel stepped into the lobby, scrolling through a list of follow-up meetings on her phone. Her assistant trailed behind, giving her notes on potential board members when a familiar voice stopped her mid-step. "Ariel." She turned slowly. Zane stood there in a charcoal suit, hands in his pockets, eyes darker than the Manhattan pavement beneath his feet. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled, polite, controlled, distant. "Zane, I didn't expect to see you here." "I noticed," he said, his throat tight. She dismissed her assistant with a nod, then faced him fully. "What do you want?" "I came to see you." Ariel raised a brow. "To what? Apologize again? Explain how you meant well while plotting to emotionally break me. Zane flinched. No, he said, voice low. To ask what you want from me. She paused. Why now? Because I watched you walk away, he said. And for the first time, I realized I don't have control over this anymore. Over you. Her eyes didn't soften. I was never yours to control, Zane. I know that now. She studied him, trying to find the catch, the usual calculation in his voice, but he looked different, raw. I heard about the Morrison Fund, he added. You're building something real, on your own. I always could, she said softly. You just never gave me the space to prove it. Zane stepped closer, and for the first time in weeks, there was vulnerability in his eyes. I miss you. Ariel tilted her head. You miss owning me. That's not the same. He swallowed hard. I miss waking up and wondering if you'll be in the kitchen humming again. I miss finding your sketches tucked between my documents. I miss watching you smile when you thought no one saw. And yes, I miss control, because now that you're gone, I have none. She blinked. That was the most honest thing he'd ever said, but she had learned her lesson. I'm not coming back, she said firmly. Zane nodded slowly. I figured. She hesitated. But that doesn't mean I don't want the truth. He looked up. I spoke to my nanny, she continued. She told me everything. About my father, my uncle, about how Daniel used them both. Zane's expression darkened. I confronted him, she added. He tried to lie, said my father knew, but he didn't expect me to record the conversation. Zane stared. You recorded him? She pulled out her phone and tapped a file. Daniel's voice crackled through the speakers, arrogant and bitter. Of course I used Charles. He was a fool, easy to manipulate. Why wouldn't I take the opportunity? Zane's eyes blazed. Ariel stopped the recording. I'm sending it to your legal team. If you're serious about clearing your father's name, now's your chance. Zane said nothing for a long moment. Then, almost hoarsely, why would you help me, after everything I did to you? Because revenge isn't love, she said, and I choose love. Zane closed his eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he murmured. Good, she replied, because I'm not ready to give it. She turned to leave, but paused. And Zane? She added, without turning around. Yes? You don't deserve me. He exhaled. I know. And she walked away, head high, heart steady. That night, Zane stood alone in his study, listening to the recording again and again, every word from Daniel Conrad slicing deeper into his guilt. Ariel had done what he couldn't. She had exposed the truth, not through force, not through leverage, but through quiet strength and dignity. The woman he married for revenge had just cleared his father's name, and she didn't even ask for credit. He sat at the piano in the corner, the one he hadn't touched since his father died, and lifted the cover, pressed a key. It rang out, broken but beautiful. Meanwhile, in her hotel room, Ariel curled up with her sketchbook and drew the day's scene. A man standing in a sea of people, looking small, lost, looking at a woman who was finally standing taller than him. She titled it, The Day He Saw Me, and below it she wrote, He thought he'd broken me, but I was only becoming. The days that followed unfolded like the slow unwrapping of a long-buried wound. For Zane Kingston, silence became his teacher. He had power, wealth, control. His last name alone sent CEOs scrambling and boardrooms trembling. But none of it meant anything when the only person he wanted to protect, he had already hurt beyond recognition, and still she had protected him. Ariel's recording of Daniel Conrad had shattered everything he thought he knew about justice. For 10 years, Zane had lived by a truth stitched together from grief and betrayal. He built his entire identity on the belief that the Morrisons destroyed his family. But it wasn't Ariel's father who wielded the knife. It was her uncle, the same man who walked away richer, the same man who let Zane rot in hatred, while Ariel bore the weight of a name that never truly belonged to the crime. She didn't just give him evidence, she gave him peace, and she walked away asking for nothing. At Kingston Legal Tower, Zane stood in the glass-walled boardroom beside his legal team. The morning light cast a sharp glare over the stack of documents now front and center of a civil suit against Daniel Conrad. "You're filing this publicly?" one of the senior attorneys asked cautiously. "Yes," Zane said without hesitation. "I want the record corrected." "And Mrs. Kingston?" Zane's eyes flickered. "She has no further involvement. Do not name her. Do not drag her through the mud." The lawyer nodded. One of the younger associates leaned in. "This will trigger media fallout. You're aware of that?" Zane looked out over the city skyline, voice firm. "Let it." Ariel sat at a small corner table in her favorite cafe downtown, her laptop open beside a sketchpad. The soft hum of background chatter soothed her. She wasn't running anymore. She was rebuilding on her own terms. Across the screen blinked a draft email to the Children's Art Therapy Alliance, accepting their offer to partner with the Aurora Initiative. She had chosen the name not just because it meant dawn, but because it felt like who she had become, a woman forged through darkness, now glowing in her own light. Her phone buzzed. Zane Kingston. She stared at the name for a long time. She didn't decline the call, but she didn't answer either. That night, Zane did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He visited his father's grave. The private cemetery on the Kingston estate had long been ignored by Zane, as if avoiding the stone kept the grief from being real. But tonight, under the weight of truth and reckoning, he stood alone before it. No guards, no chauffeurs, just him and the ghost of the man he once idolized. "I thought I was honoring you by punishing them," he said aloud, voice raw. "I thought revenge would fix the hole you left behind." His hands clenched. But I was wrong. The wind stirred gently through the trees, and in the distance, thunder rolled, a quiet echo, like an answer. "She gave me the truth," he said. "The same girl I blamed, the same girl I tried to break. She set me free from a lie I've lived in for 10 years. He knelt, laying a fresh white lily at the foot of the grave. "I think you'd like her," he added. "You'd probably tell me I'm a damn fool for pushing her away." And then, for the first time in years, Zane whispered, "I'm sorry." The next morning, Ariel received a call from the head editor at New York Weekly. "Mrs. Kingston, we're reaching out for a statement about your uncle. He's being investigated for embezzlement and Zane Kingston is taking legal action." "I'm aware," Ariel said coolly. "Do you have a comment about Mr. Kingston's actions? Are you involved in the legal strategy?" "No," she said firmly. "But I support what he's doing. It's long overdue." "And what about the rumors that you're separated?" A pause. "I think we're both learning what it means to love without pain," she said softly. "Sometimes distance is the only way to heal." The reporter fell silent, caught off guard by her composure. Ariel ended the call and closed her laptop. She didn't cry, not anymore. That afternoon, she received an envelope, no name, no return address, just the initials ZK in silver ink. Inside was a letter, handwritten. "Ariel, I don't deserve your forgiveness, so I won't ask for it. I won't insult you by pretending a letter can undo everything. But I need you to know that I am trying to unlearn everything that made me believe pain was the only currency I had left. Your uncle will answer for what he did. That chapter is closed, and if there's any chance you'll let me earn your presence again, not as a punishment, not as a pawn, but as a partner, I will wait as long as it takes. You once asked me what I felt when I looked at you. I didn't answer then, because I was afraid. But now I know. When I look at you, I see the woman who saved me from myself. Zayn Ariel reread the letter 3 times. Then she tucked it into her sketchbook, closed the cover gently, and whispered, "I'm not ready." But she smiled for the first time in days, because she wasn't angry anymore. She was free. The next day, the media erupted. Daniel Conrad faces criminal charges in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Zane Kingston clears. Late father's name with newly released documents. Ariel Morrison. Kingston praised for role in exposing financial cover-up. But Ariel stayed silent. She didn't give interviews. She didn't release statements. She simply walked into her next board meeting with her head held high, her project fully funded, and her next event booked. No longer someone's wife, not someone's pawn, just Ariel. That evening, while reviewing portfolios for her scholarship candidates, she got a call from an unknown number. She answered. "Ariel?" the voice asked, her breath caught. "Hi, Mrs. Kingston," said a girl's soft voice. "My name is Clara. I just found out I won the Aurora Art Scholarship. I don't know what to say." Ariel smiled. "You already said it. You earned this." There was a pause. Then the girl asked, "Why did you name it Aurora?" Ariel looked out her hotel window at the horizon, drenched in pink and orange, the sun setting low, but not gone. "Because it's what comes after the darkness," she said, "and because it means a new beginning." The storm outside Kingston Tower rolled in fast and furious, thunder cracking like gunfire over the skyline, streaks of lightning scattering across the darkened sky. Inside the sleek, glass-paneled executive suite, Zane Kingston stood motionless as his legal team briefed him on the fallout. "Conrad's assets have been frozen," said Jonathan Marks, his lead attorney. His lawyers tried to delay the indictment, but the recordings Ariel provided, along with internal Morrison financials, were airtight. Zane said nothing, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the rain bead across the window pane. It should have felt like victory. Instead, all he felt was fatigue. His father's name was cleared. Morrison Industries was crumbling. Daniel Conrad's empire was in legal flames. And Ariel still hadn't come home. "Arrange the public statement," Zane said finally, his voice low. "Make it clear the Kingstons want no further media involvement." Marks nodded and began gathering his files. Zane remained by the window. He'd won the war, but he'd lost the woman who mattered more than any battlefield. Meanwhile, across town, Ariel walked through the private gallery that now housed her Aurora Youth Art Showcase. Students from around the city had their work displayed under spotlighted frames, their names etched in gold beside each piece. She smiled faintly as a 14-year-old girl pointed out her painting to her proud father. In the corner, a young boy stood beside his charcoal drawing of a city skyline with a single star shining above it. Ariel paused, reading the title. "Hope doesn't shout, it whispers." She bit her lip to keep from crying. How strange, she thought, that a child could summarize her entire life in one sentence. She turned to leave when she heard her name from behind. "Ariel?" She stiffened. That voice wasn't Zane's. It was Daniel Conrad. She turned slowly, her entire body tensing. He stood in the hallway, wearing a grey overcoat and a smug expression, as though the indictments hadn't touched him at all. His eyes scanned the exhibit, like he owned the walls themselves. "You shouldn't be here," Ariel said coldly. He raised an eyebrow. "This is a public event, isn't it? Don't worry, I'm not here to make a scene." "You already did," she said, folding her arms. "In court, on the news, in my family's history." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't pretend you're a saint, Ariel. You think you're better than the rest of us because you married your way into power." "I didn't marry into power," she snapped. "I married into pain, and I rose out of it on my own." Daniel's face hardened. You think you've won? I still have allies, people who don't trust Zane, who think you're poisoning his judgment. Ariel blinked. Is that a threat? It's a warning, he said, leaning in close. You may have exposed me, but I'm not the only one with secrets. Your husband isn't clean either. I know about Zane's past, she replied calmly. I know what he's done, and I know what he's trying to become. Daniel chuckled under his breath. Then you're more naive than I thought. Before she could respond, security arrived, 2 suited guards flanking Daniel from either side. Ms. Kingston? One of them asked. Is this man bothering you? Ariel held Daniel's gaze. Escort him out. As they led him away, Daniel turned back with one final sneer. Watch your back, Ariel. Not all enemies come with warning labels. Later that night, Ariel sat in her hotel room, hands trembling slightly as she dialed Zane's number for the first time in over a week. He answered on the second ring. Ariel. His voice was low, almost reverent. Daniel came to the exhibit, she said immediately. He's watching us, and he hinted there are others working with him, people inside your circle. Zane didn't sound surprised. I figured he'd try something. I don't think he's finished, she added. He knows we're the ones who brought him down. He won't forget that. Zane exhaled. Come home. She paused. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he added. I'm asking for your safety, and for mine. I don't trust anyone around me right now, not even my board. Ariel closed her eyes. I'll come, she said softly, but not because I owe you anything. I know. I'm coming for me this time, not for you, not for Morrison, not for Kingston. Zane was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's the best reason of all. 2 hours later, the familiar black car pulled up in front of Kingston Manor. As the butler opened the door, Ariel stepped out in a cream wool coat, her curls tied back in a silk scarf. She didn't hesitate this time, didn't pause at the grand front door or flinch at the sight of the towering columns. She walked inside like she belonged there, because this time, she chose it. Zane stood at the bottom of the staircase, shirt sleeves rolled up, tension in his shoulders. They stared at each other. You look stronger, he said quietly. I am. He stepped closer. Can I show you something? Ariel nodded, though wariness flickered behind her eyes. He led her down the hallway, not to his office, but to the once-sealed archive room she'd never entered before. Inside, shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with family records, photographs, journals, and paintings, many of which had been boxed up since his father's death. I found this yesterday, he said, lifting a large envelope. It's my father's handwritten account of his final project with Morrison Industries, the part he wanted remembered. He handed it to her. Ariel sat on the leather armchair in the corner and opened the letter, scanning the neat cursive. It was filled with heartbreak, but also grace. Zane's father hadn't hated Charles Morrison. He'd trusted him, and though he acknowledged being hurt, he'd expressed doubt about Morrison's role in the betrayal. Something was off, he wrote. Too many pieces moved too quickly. Charles looked just as blindsided as I did. Ariel's throat closed. I wish he'd spoken out, she whispered. He thought he had time, Zane replied. Until he didn't. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. What do we do now? She asked. Zane sat on the floor beside her chair, back against the wall, hands clasped between his knees. We start again, he said, not as strangers, not as enemies, not even as husband and wife. Then as what? He looked up at her, a faint smile on his lips. As the only 2 people left who still care enough to make this right. For the first time in months, Kingston Manor didn't feel like a mausoleum. The silence was no longer heavy. It was thoughtful, calm, healing. Zane stood on the back terrace in his shirt sleeves, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise over the far gardens. The orange-pink hue bled gently across the sky, warm and silent, just like her. Inside, he could hear the soft clinking of a teacup being placed on porcelain. Ariel was awake. She always rose early now, before the staff, before the headlines, before the chaos of the day could chase her quiet away. He turned, drawn to her presence before he even saw her. Ariel stood barefoot in the doorway to the terrace, wrapped in one of his button-up shirts, sleeves too long, the hem skimming her thighs. Her curls were loose today, and her skin glowed in the morning light. Zane had known many kinds of beauty in his life, but none of them had undone him like this. She walked toward him slowly, her mug of chamomile tea cradled in both hands. "Morning," she said softly. He nodded. "You slept?" "Enough," she replied. They stood side by side for a long moment, sipping in silence. Finally, he asked, "Do you regret coming back?" Ariel didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed her eyes, tilting her head toward the breeze. "I don't know what this is yet," she said, "but I know I'm not afraid of it anymore." Zane looked at her, his chest tightening. "Not afraid of me?" She turned her head slowly, eyes locking with his. "Not afraid of us?" That evening, a quiet knock echoed on Ariel's door. Zane stood there in a slate-grey sweater, his hair tousled, barefoot like he hadn't meant to come, like something had pulled him there against his will. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a small wrapped box. Ariel took it cautiously. "Is this a bribe?" "A peace offering." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook, her initials embossed in gold in the corner. Inside the front cover was a handwritten note. "For every moment I tried to silence you, fill this with what I missed." Ariel's fingers lingered on the pages. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know it doesn't make up for everything," he added. "No, it doesn't," she agreed, but she stepped aside. "Come in." They sat on the couch, the air between them quiet but not tense. Zane reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" she asked. He handed it to her. It was the unsigned divorce papers. Ariel stared down at them. Her breath caught. "I had them drawn up weeks ago," he said. "I never signed. I couldn't." "Because of the business?" "No," he said simply. "Because of you." She looked up, wary but not unkind. "What are you saying, Zane?" "I'm saying—" He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't want this to be a contract anymore. I don't want revenge. I don't want distance. I don't want cold beds and colder silences." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice raw. "I want a life, with you, if you'll let me start again." Ariel was silent for a long time. Then she stood up, walked across the room, and opened a drawer. She pulled out a folder. It was her version of the divorce papers. Signed, folded, unsent. She brought them over and set them beside his. "I thought I wanted out," she said. "But what I really wanted was a version of us that didn't hurt." Zane swallowed hard. "And do you think that's still possible?" She stared at him, and then, quietly, deliberately, she sat beside him, her hand resting over his. "I don't know if it's possible, but I think we deserve to find out." His hand turned, fingers weaving through hers. "You make me want to be someone I'm not," he murmured. "Good," she whispered. "Because the man you were nearly lost everything." Days passed, and something changed between them. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't loud, it was moments, small ones. Zane bringing her tea in the morning instead of the staff. Ariel stitching a button back onto his cuff. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, not about war or business, but about childhoods, fears, books, music, dreams. Late one night, she found him in the library, asleep with a book in his lap. The fire was dying low in the hearth. She knelt beside him, brushing a curl from his forehead. He stirred, eyes fluttering open. "I didn't mean to fall asleep," he murmured. "You looked peaceful," she said. "I didn't want to wake you." His hand caught hers before she could stand. He pulled her gently down into the chair beside him, her legs curled into his lap. They sat like that, tangled, silent for a long time. And then, without fear or tension, she kissed him. It wasn't like the last time, when rage collided with desire and passion bled into punishment. This kiss was soft, intentional, forgiving. Zane melted into her touch, his hand cradling the back of her head, his body relaxing into hers, as if he'd been holding his breath for months. When they finally parted, he whispered against her lips, "Please don't leave again." She kissed the corner of his mouth and replied, "Then don't give me a reason to." The next morning, Zane cancelled a major corporate deal with a weapons contractor known to fund shady international projects. The deal had been on the table for months. His advisors had told him it would be a gold mine. He didn't care, because Ariel had mentioned, just once, that the company had a history of exploiting children in war zones. And that was enough. That afternoon, she found a copy of the terminated contract sitting on her desk with a sticky note attached. "Some gold isn't worth digging for." Z. She smiled to herself, heart fluttering. He was trying, really trying. Later that night, they lay in bed together for the first time, not as strangers, not as enemies, not even as reluctant allies, but as two people who had survived something cruel and were now building something kind. Zane held her against his chest, fingers tracing soft circles on her arm. "Do you ever think," he whispered, "that maybe we were supposed to go through hell, just to get here?" Ariel smiled against his skin. "Or maybe we went through hell to become the people who could love like this." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, eyes closing for the first time in peace. Outside, the stars blinked awake across the midnight sky, and inside, two broken hearts finally began to heal, together. The soft breeze of early fall swept through the garden behind Kingston Manor, rustling the vines and floral arches that now transformed the once solemn grounds into something magical. No cameras, no guests selected for power, just those who mattered, and two people finally standing face to face without lies between them. Ariel Morrison. Kingston stood at the far end of the aisle, her bare feet sinking into the velvet of the grass. Her dress was not grand, not the expensive silk she'd worn the first time. No pearls, no $10,000 lace, just a soft ivory gown, off the shoulder, with hand-stitched embroidery running across the sleeves and hem. Her curls were pulled into a loose bun, strands falling to frame her face, and her only jewelry was a single sapphire pendant, Zane's mother's, gifted to her 3 days ago. Zane waited for her beneath the rose-covered archway. He wore a light grey suit, no tie, no stiffness, just a man finally comfortable in his skin. His eyes never left hers, not even as the pianist played the softest notes of Clair de Lune. This time, he wasn't watching her like she was a mystery to unravel. He was watching her like she was home. The ceremony was simple. No priest, no lawyers, no forced vows. Just Ariel, Zane, and the truth they had bled and clawed their way toward. They stood beneath the open sky, surrounded by flowers Ariel had planted herself, as Lucia, Zane's housekeeper of 15 years, wiped away a tear from the front row. Ariel looked up at him, her voice soft but unwavering. "When I first came into your life, I was broken, but you," she smiled gently, "were shattered. I tried to hate you, and you tried to use me. But somewhere in all that hurt, we found something worth fighting for." Zane's throat tightened. "I don't need a perfect man," she continued. "I need a man who chooses truth, even when it's hard. And I know now, you're that man." She reached out and held his hand steady. "I'm not standing here today because of our past. I'm standing here because of our future." The sun caught in her eyes like light in honey. Zane took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. "When I first saw you," he said, "I thought you were the final move in a game I had already won. But you weren't a pawn. You were the only thing on that board that mattered." Ariel's lips trembled as he continued. "You challenged everything I believed about revenge, about love, about what it means to forgive. You didn't just save my father's name, you saved me, and for that, I owe you everything." He stepped closer, his hand now cradling her cheek. "I don't vow to be perfect. I vow to be real, to show up, to love you in all the ways I never knew how, and in every way I'm still learning." Ariel blinked back tears, a soft smile blooming on her lips. They didn't need to say, "I do." Their silence was enough. Zane leaned forward, and this time, their kiss wasn't an apology. It was a beginning. Later, under strings of hanging lights and a sky streaked with stars, they danced barefoot on the garden stone path. No DJ, no crowd, just jazz music and two hands that finally held each other without tension. Zane twirled her slowly, her laughter spilling into the air like music of its own. "Are we married again?" Ariel asked teasingly. Zane pulled her close. "No." She raised a brow. "We were never really married the first time," he said, brushing his lips along her temple. "This is our first marriage, the real one." Ariel leaned into him. "Then this is my first time falling in love with my husband." His heart thudded hard against hers. "Me too," he whispered. As the night deepened, they found themselves sitting on the stone steps of the terrace, a blanket wrapped around their shoulders, sharing leftover lemon cake from a paper plate. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was theirs. Ariel leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "I used to think love had to look a certain way, like fairy tales or movies, sparkles and slow motion." Zane chuckled. "So I ruined that?" She smiled. "You made it real." He wrapped an arm around her. "I thought love was a weakness, a trap, and now?" He glanced at her, eyes shining. "Now I think it's the only reason to fight." Later that week, the headlines read, "Zane Kingston reclaims legacy and redefines love. Ariel Morrison. Kingston leads multi-million-dollar arts initiative, becomes one of the most influential philanthropists of the year. From scandal to soulmates, the redemption of Kingston and Morrison." But they didn't care, because they weren't performing anymore. There were no cameras in the kitchen when Ariel made pancakes in one of Zane's oversized t-shirts. No headlines when he slipped behind her, arms wrapped around her waist, pressing a sleepy kiss to her neck. There were no journalists the day she handed him a sketch, one of them dancing barefoot under the stars, and he framed it in his office, right above the original deed to Kingston Industries. No one saw the day they sat on the floor of the nursery they were quietly building upstairs, or the night he whispered against her belly, "I hope they have your heart," but they saw it, and that was enough. It began like any other morning. Ariel stood by the nursery window, sunlight filtering through the pale yellow curtains as she folded tiny baby clothes into a drawer. Her fingers lingered on a cotton onesie with silver stars stitched across the chest. She smiled to herself, gently rubbing the curve of her belly. 20 weeks, halfway to meeting the child she once thought she'd never raise inside a home that felt like love. Downstairs, Zane was already in his office, holding a Zoom call with the company's new ethics committee. His posture was relaxed, but his voice still carried that firm, no-nonsense tone that built empires and crushed egos. But then something shifted. A message pinged on his personal phone. Unmarked number, no subject line, just a link to a private server. Zane frowned and clicked. What he saw made his blood turn cold. Video footage, low resolution, grainy, but real. Daniel Conrad, seated across from Clive Stanton, Zane's former chief financial officer. And the audio? "You understand," Daniel was saying, "if you keep pushing the Morrison Girls Art Fund, the Kingston name loses value in certain circles." "Zane's gone soft," Clive replied. "The board hates it. If he steps down, I step in." Daniel smiled. "And I wipe your debts clean." Zane closed the file, heart pounding. A coup, in the works, from inside his own walls. He bolted upright and called his head of security. "Find Clive Stanton. I want him off the property, off the board, off everything, immediately." "Yes, sir." Zane ran a hand over his face. He had built this empire with steel and fire. But that wasn't enough. It never had been. Because the real threat had always been in the people who smiled while plotting your fall. Upstairs, Ariel was finishing her call with the Aurora board when Lucia tapped gently on her door. "Mrs. Kingston," the housekeeper said quietly, "you may want to come downstairs. Mr. Kingston, he's in a mood." Ariel thanked her and headed down the grand staircase. She found Zane standing in the foyer, jacket already on, jaw clenched. "I'm going to the tower," he said, without turning. "What happened?" He finally looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, there was fear behind his eyes. "Daniel's not done," he said. "He got to someone on the board. I need to shut it down before they can move." "Zane, don't worry, I'm handling it." "That's not what I was going to say." She walked toward him, took his hand. "You don't have to do this alone." He softened just slightly, but his hands were still shaking. Ariel leaned in and placed a kiss on his knuckles. "Come home soon." "I will." 2 hours later, Ariel received the second message, encrypted, direct to her private inbox. Subject line: "If you love your husband, tell him to stop digging." No name, no trace, just the threat. Her stomach dropped. She immediately called Zane. Voicemail. She tried again. Still nothing. Her heart began to pound, not in panic, but in instinct. The same instinct that had once told her she was in danger. The same instinct that had once told her Zane was more than his rage. She didn't hesitate. She called Eleanor King, Zane's cousin, and the new acting director of internal affairs at Kingston Corp. "Eleanor, it's Ariel. I think Zane's walking into something bigger than he realizes." "I'll track his location now," Eleanor said immediately. "Send security and tell them not to be discreet." Back at Kingston Tower, Zane stood in the main conference room, glaring across the polished table at Clive Stanton. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Zane said, voice low and dangerous. Clive smirked. "You may be brilliant, Zane, but you've gone soft. You married the enemy's daughter. You're pouring company money into art programs and community centers. The investors don't want morality, they want profit." Zane stepped closer. "And you want a crown you didn't earn." Clive's expression turned smug. "Well, lucky for me, your time's almost up." That's when the side door opened. Ariel, in a cream trench coat, expression unreadable. Behind her, 3 security guards walked in and flanked the room. Clive turned, stunned. "What the hell is this?" "You're being removed," she said calmly, sliding a document onto the table. "Zane gave me temporary proxy rights before he left for Boston 2 weeks ago. I'm a legal stakeholder now." Zane blinked. "You what?" Ariel gave him a look. "You didn't marry a pawn, remember?" The guards escorted Clive out, despite his angry protests. The room fell into silence. Zane turned to her. "How did you know to come?" She lifted her phone. "I got a threat. I trusted my gut." He exhaled. I was afraid you'd run. I don't run anymore, she said. Not from you. Not from them. Zane stepped forward and cupped her face. I keep falling for you. Ariel smiled through her tears. Then fall harder. That night, back at the manor, Zane walked into the nursery and found her sitting on the floor, a stuffed bear in her lap. He sat beside her, pulling her close. You didn't have to save me today, he murmured. You saved me first, she whispered. No, he said, brushing her cheek. You saved me when you showed me who I could be. They sat in silence for a while, just breathing each other in. Finally, Zane looked down at her stomach. Boy or girl? He asked. Ariel shrugged. I don't care. As long as they grow up knowing love like this, he nodded. And strength. And truth, she added. No lies, no vengeance, just legacy. Zane kissed her softly. They'll have all that, and more. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, Kingston Manor was finally still. Not broken, not haunted, but reborn. In a sunlit garden outside the Aurora Arts Center, a toddler giggled as he tried to chase butterflies across the grass. His mother sat on a picnic blanket nearby, sketching the scene with soft charcoal strokes. Her hair was tied up, and her wedding ring caught the light as she moved. Zane Kingston sat beside her, reading from a children's book, though the boy was far too interested in his own feat to listen. The news had long stopped caring about them. Their companies were thriving, their pasts were closed chapters, but the love, still unfolding, still real, still theirs, because when a ruthless billionaire marries an innocent girl for revenge, and discovers she was never the enemy, he learns that love isn't the weakness, it's the weapon that saves him. Here comes the end of the story. Thanks for watching, amazing followers.